Live television has this incredible promise, right? It's immediate, it's unscripted, it's real. But what happens when that reality becomes the final public moments of someone's life? Today, we're going to explore these really difficult but important stories.
I mean, think about that question. It really forces you to confront the whole nature of media, of spectacle, and, well, our role as the audience. These aren't just clips you find online. They're the last chapters of real people's lives, and they played out for the entire world to see.
So we're going to look at these stories, and we're going to do it with sensitivity. We're not just going to talk about what happened, but also the ripple effect these events had on television, on safety, and on our collective memory.
Yeah, sometimes tragedy just doesn't wait for its cue. It can show up, completely unexpected, right in the middle of a conversation, turning a simple talk show set into the scene of a sudden and very final farewell.
Those were the actual words of J.I. Riddell. He was the 72-year-old publisher, a real pioneer of the organic food movement. He's on the Dick Cavett Show, and he's passionately talking about his healthy lifestyle, totally convinced he's got decades left. The tragic irony of that statement, wow, it is still just chilling to this day.
So get this, as the next guest is being interviewed, Riddell just goes silent in his chair. The audience, even the host at first, they had no idea what was going on. He passed away right there, on the studio floor. It was such a stark, sudden reminder of mortality, right in the middle of the world of entertainment.
Riddell's death was this shocking intrusion of reality. But what happens when that reality is mistaken for performance? We're about to look at some moments where that line between the two just completely dissolved, leaving audiences tragically unaware that what they were watching was real.
12 million. That is a huge number. And that's how many people were watching the British comedian Tommy Cooper perform on a live variety show back in 1984. I mean, this guy was a national treasure, famous for his magic tricks that would just hilariously go wrong on purpose.
And this is where it gets so heartbreaking. His whole act, his whole career, was built on things looking like they were failing. So when he collapsed, the audience did exactly what they were supposed to do. They laughed. It actually took the director noticing the routine was running way too long to realize something was seriously wrong. Behind that curtain, a frantic effort to save his life was happening, all while the show had to somehow go on.
And this just perfectly illustrates this recurring awful theme. A really similar tragedy happened 15 years later, but this time in the world of professional wrestling, with a performer named Owen Hart. His big entrance stunt was supposed to look like a clumsy superhero, so when it went horribly wrong, that initial confusion in the crowd was, well, it was devastatingly similar.
78 feet. That's how far Owen Hart fell. It was during a live pay-per-view event in 1999. He was being lowered from the rafters into the ring, and his support line just let go.
The really devastating detail here is that the very piece of equipment that was meant for a quick, dramatic effect, that became the thing that caused his death. It was just the wrong kind of harness for that job, way too sensitive. And to make it even more tragic, it's been reported that Hart himself had actually expressed some concerns about the safety of the stunt beforehand. So, we've talked about performers whose acts went terribly wrong. Now, let's shift gears and talk about professionals who were simply doing their job and the really tough question of who's responsible when the workplace itself turns fatal.
Back in 2019, the legendary Filipino actor Eddie Garcia died after a simple, totally preventable accident. I mean, look at this breakdown. It was so tragically mundane. A misplaced cable on the set, he trips, and the fall breaks his neck. This was a 90-year-old man, a veteran of more than 600 movies and shows, and he was lost because of a basic safety oversight.
And Garcia's death, sadly, is not an isolated incident. You have Michael Lush, a volunteer who was rehearsing a bungee jump for a BBC show in 1986 when his clip just detached. Or Kenneth Steedman, an actor killed in '96 when his dune buggy flipped during a pretty simple scene. Each story just highlights these hidden and often preventable dangers that exist on any production set.
But the dangers aren't just limited to the people in front of the camera, the stars. Broadcast journalists and their crews, they face their own unique set of risks, where the very act of reporting the news can put them right in harm's way.
These two events are just harrowing. In Phoenix, people were watching a routine police chase live on TV, and they suddenly saw the two news helicopters covering it just collide and fall out of the sky.
And then in Virginia, an audience watched in absolute horror as a morning news segment was interrupted by gunfire. A disgruntled former employee murdered a reporter and her cameraman right on the air. In both of these cases, the viewers at home became instant, unwilling witnesses to a tragedy.
So sometimes a death on camera isn't a hidden accident or a risk of the job. Sometimes it's a national event. It's a moment of pride and exploration that, in an instant, turns into a generation-defining catastrophe, broadcast live on every single channel. On January 28, 1986, basically all of America was watching. Classrooms packed with kids were tuned in, especially because a teacher, Krista McCauley, was on board. You can see on this timeline there were warnings about the cold weather that were ignored. The liftoff looked perfect, and then, just 73 seconds later, that horrifying explosion against the blue sky. The cameras just kept rolling on the smoke trails as the nation's commentators fell into this stunned, horrified silence. 7. That one number represents the enormous human cost of that day. We remember them. Commander Dick Scobie, pilot Michael J. Smith, mission specialist Judith Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, and Ronald McNair, payload specialist Gregory Jarvis, and, of course, the teacher who captured the whole nation's imagination, Krista McAuliffe. 7 lives, just gone in an instant, as the world watched. So, after witnessing these heartbreaking events, what's the takeaway? What did we learn? Well, these tragedies, as awful as they were, they forced entire industries to change, to really confront their failures, and ultimately to create a legacy of safety from all that loss.
And you can see the direct impact right here. Michael Lush's death, which we talked about, that basically ended the whole era of dangerous, unregulated stunts on British TV. Owen Hart's fall led to major lawsuits and intense scrutiny of stunt work in wrestling. And Eddie Garcia's preventable death. It sparked a whole movement demanding better on-set safety standards and accountability in the Filipino film industry. These aren't just footnotes. They are real, hard-won changes that were born from tragedy.
At the end of the day, these are so much more than just shocking moments in broadcast history. They are powerful, permanent reminders that behind every screen, every performance, and every single news report, there are real people with real lives at stake.
And so that really leaves us with one final tough question to think about. As viewers, when we watch these things unfold, where do we draw the line? It's a really complex ethical question about our relationship with the media we watch, and honestly, there's no easy answer. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.